Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the conference call on the half-year results 2025 of VERBUND AG. I am Shari, the conference call operator. I would like to remind you that all participants will be in listen-only mode and the conference is being recorded. The presentation will be followed by a Q&A session. You can register for questions at any time by pressing star and 1 on your telephone. For operator assistance, please press star and 0. The conference must not be recorded for publication or broadcast. At this time, it's my pleasure to hand over to Mr. Peter Kollmann. Please go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me welcome you to the presentation of VERBUND's half-year results, and let me thank you for joining today's conference call. At the beginning, let me say that the first half confronted us with some challenges. On the macro side, we saw ongoing geopolitical uncertainties and risks related to the consequences of the tariff policies triggered by the US government and its potential impact on the European economy. On the micro side, we were confronted with a very volatile electricity pricing environment, a very low hydropower production, and regulatory uncertainties with regard to the Austrian energy profit tax system, which has been extended until 2030. In these highly volatile markets, VERBUND presents declining but still solid results for the first half year 25. Now on the next page, let me highlight the most important influencing factors for the results development at a glance, and let me highlight one of them, which is, of course, the hydro coefficient. The hydro coefficient determining the generation from our run-of-river hydropower plants was significantly lower compared to last year and also well below the long-term average. At a historic low level of 0.76, it was 24 percentage points below the long-term average and 36 percentage points below the half-year 24. The reason for the decline was an extraordinary low snow level in winter, as a consequence, a low hydro availability in the melting season, and in addition, low precipitation levels afterwards. Luckily, we had some offsetting factors which were the reason why we were able to partially compensate the reduction in results. First, the average achieved contract price in the first 6 months 25 increased slightly by 4 euros to 117 euros per megawatt hour compared to the first 6 months 24, mainly because of limit sales at the beginning of 23 and from November 23 onwards. This allowed VERBUND to benefit in 25 from the still high futures for electricity at that time. Second, we had much better income from flexibility products, especially resulting from the optimization of the use of our storage power plants. And third, we had a temporarily higher result contribution from our electricity high voltage grid, Austrian Power Grid, APG. Now, to finalize the list of influencing factors, let me add another two having a negative effect on the results development, which were the lower generation levels from wind power as a result of the low average wind availability and the negative impact from the extension of the Austrian energy profit tax system. Now we'll go into more details. On the next page you see our hedging volumes. I will start with the fact that, and I repeat this at every conference call, but it's important, €1 per megawatt hour plus or minus higher average achieved price has a sensitivity of approximately 25 million euros on our EBITDA line. Now, the development of the average achieved contract prices reflects the backwardation of the electricity futures. We have achieved an average contract price for the first half year of 117.2 euros compared to 113.3 in 24. For the full year 25, we have sold 87% of our own generation volumes as of the end of June at a price of 115.8. For 26, we have sold 49% at a price of 81.4. And for 27, we have only sold 3% at a price of 81 euros per megawatt hour. Now, on a mark-to-market basis, with prices as of the 23rd of July, the average achieved contract price for 25 is at 112.5, for 26 at 85, and for 27 at 82.7. However, as I mentioned before, only 3% hedged, so there is still a lot of volatility in the power price for 27. On the next page, a very important subject, which I'm sure we will discuss later. This topic has a negative impact already in the first half year 25. This is the extended levy on excess profits in Austria, which hits the utility industry here and particularly VERBUND. Let me highlight the most important cornerstones for you, but let me also stress that the final impact for 25 still depends on the average contract price on a monthly basis, the relevant generation volumes to be taxed, and the deductible renewable capex. The tax has started on the 1st of April 25 and is divided into yearly periods lasting until the end of March 2030. The revenues are capped at 90 euros per megawatt hour for existing installations and at 100 euros for new installations. Now, there are exemptions for an example, and that is an important one, pump storage, but also control power and congestion management, as it provides stability to the system. Of the surplus revenues, 95% will be taxed. It will also be possible to offset investments amounting to 75% of eligible investments, but please note that the respective Investitionsverordnung, which is sort of like an invest regulation, with all the details, is not published yet, meaning that there are some legal uncertainties regarding the points I can give you at this point of time. What we have summarized here on this page is basically our current understanding, and I think there is a relatively high probability that this will actually happen the way we have described it here in our presentation. The levy in the first half 25 amounted to 22 million euros in Austria, 4.8 million in Spain, and 1.3 million in Romania on the EBITDA level. For the full year 25, we are still within the range which I have given you 3 months ago, which is between 50 and 100 million euro on the group profit level. However, as it looks today, we are moving towards the 100 million as a result of the investments which we can use to offset the levy. On the next page, the flexibility product, which, as I mentioned before, had a very significant offsetting effect for us. The first half year 25 amounted to approximately 160 million, after approximately 130 million last year. For the full year, we expect approximately 280 million euros coming from flexibility products. We saw a very positive development, particularly in the pumping reverse operations. You also see the last 3 years in comparison, as well as the different products of flexibility products. Please note that flexibility products contribute to 3 different segments at VERBUND: the hydro segment, the sales segment, as well as the thermal segment. For competitive reasons, we do not provide more information in terms of this particular separation into the three segments. On the next page, the hydro segment. Now there I would like to comment on some important developments. As I mentioned before, 0.76, the hydro coefficient was 24 percentage points below the long-term average and 36 percentage points below the level of the first 6 months in 24. The production from annual storage power plants decreased by 3.5%. Our own production from hydropower, therefore, overall decreased by 4,890 gigawatt hours, or 28.3%, to 12,400 gigawatt hours compared to 24. The decreased volumes could not be compensated by the slightly higher average achieved contract price. It helped, but only to a relatively small amount. But it was mainly the strong contribution from flexibility products. Therefore, the EBITDA in the hydro segment decreased by 31.9% to slightly above 1 billion. Regarding CapEx, 25 will be marked by the planned COD of two important projects. The Limburg 3 pump storage power plant project, which increases the flexible pumping capacity by 480 megawatts, as well as the 14 megawatts Stegenwald run-of-river power plant project. Now on the new renewable segment, the new renewables coefficient, here it is an index quantifying the generation from wind power and PV, was also significantly below the average and below the first half 24 levels. It amounted to 0.78 in 25 compared to 0.94 in 24. The generation from wind power decreased by 14.6%, or 144 gigawatt hours, and amounted to 144 gigawatt hours in the first half year 25. Less favorable wind conditions in all countries of operation of VERBUND, namely in Austria, Germany, Spain, and Romania, were the reason for this development. Generation from PV in Spain, Austria, and Italy rose by approximately 10 gigawatt hours to 219 gigawatt hours due to new installations. Now, taking a look at the EBITDA development, in this segment we see a slight increase of 5.2% to an EBITDA amounting to 92.6 million. The increase, despite lower production volumes, is due to higher average prices achieved. VERBUND today operates currently 1.2 gigawatts of new renewables in Spain, Austria, Germany, Romania, and Italy, and the activities in the target markets continued as described on the chart on the present information. Here on the next page, we talk about the sales segment. When we look at the EBITDA development in the sales segment, we see that EBITDA strongly increased to a positive value of 94.4 million because we were able to improve the earnings development in the end customer business. The EBITDA in the retail business improved from minus 44 million in 24 to a level of plus 4 million in 25. The improvement in the end customer business is a result of the implementation of several measures to increase profitability, like an optimized electricity procurement strategy and cost-cutting measures. The EBITDA in the trading business improved from 59 million euros to 91 million euros. The improvement here is mainly due to storage optimization on the day-ahead market. Our trading subsidiary is very focused on implementing storage capacities primarily in our core market, Germany and Austria, in order to benefit from the increasingly volatile pricing environment and volatile systems which we currently see all over Europe. Currently, we have approximately 110 megawatts of battery storage in operation, 3 large-scale battery storage projects in the implementation phase, and more than 400 megawatts of projects in development. With that, I would like to hand over to Andreas Woller. Please, Andreas.
Thank you, Peter. So on the next page, page 9, you see the development of the grid segment. The EBITDA from the electricity grid business, according to IFRS, was approximately 185 million, an increase by about 56 million. This increase is mainly due to higher contributions from auctions. In addition, higher congestion management services and higher national network revenues based on higher transported volumes were the reason for the strong results. Let me add, however, that this additional income is only temporary because we are only allowed to earn RAB multiplied with WACC, and as a consequence, based on the regulatory system, we have to give the surplus back to this, with a time delay. However, we have raised the EBITDA guidance for the electricity grid for 25 by 30 million to a level of approximately 330 million euros. The planned amount of the regulatory account, reflecting the surplus profits of the past, at the end of 25 will be approximately 600 million. With regard to the results contribution of Gas Connect Austria, we report an EBITDA of approximately 28 million. The strong decrease can be explained by higher fixed costs. The EBITDA guidance for 25 with regard to GCA is at approximately 50 million euros under IFRS. The decline compared to last year can be explained by the cessation of Russian natural gas transport through Ukraine. As a consequence, the shortfall of approximately 30 million will reduce the 25 result and will be compensated with T+2 starting from 27. As the regulator will amend the volumes for the tariff calculation at the end of 25, for 26 we do not expect a negative impact. Regarding CapEx, 25 will be marked by the implementation of the National Grid Development Plan, which foresees CapEx of approximately 9 billion within the next 10 years. In 25, APG plans to invest roughly 550 million, which increases the RAB, the basis for the return calculation. The CapEx goes into the closing of the 380 kilowatt ring in Austria, the increase in interconnector capacities and in various substations, all measures necessary to cope with the increasing volatile electricity system. Let me continue with all other segments. Generation from thermal power plants was up to 965 gigawatt hours, which was driven by higher market-driven production. In 25, the use of CCGT Mellach was only determined by market signals, whereas from April to September 26, one line of CCGT Mellach will again be compensated in a market stability reserve system. In addition, higher average prices achieved, and in particular positive effects from the valuation of energy derivatives and a higher contribution from flex products led to the increase in EBITDA. The contribution from Kelag, the provincial utility of Carinthia, decreased slightly from 52 to 49 million. Now, starting from page 11, we show how the effects described before influence VERBUND's key financial figures. Because of the aforementioned developments, EBITDA decreased by 19.8% to 1.413 billion. Depreciation increased by 5.1% to roughly 300 million euros due to the increased investment volume, especially in the grid segment. The financial result strongly improved from 24.7 to 49.9 million. On the one hand, we saw slightly weaker result from Kelag and lower interest income from money market transactions. The other financial result had a clearly positive one-off effect due to the measurement of an obligation to return an interest relating to the Jochenstein hydropower plant. Taxes on income amounted to 259.7 million. The group result therefore decreased by 11.8% to 802.7 million euros. The adjusted group result decreased by 22.3% to 783.6 million. Finally, I would like to mention the slight decrease in additions to tangible assets, in total from 444.6 to 417.1 million in half year 25. On the next page 12, we see the final key figures of VERBUND. VERBUND's operating cash flow in half year 25 decreased to 1.338.4 billion, mainly due to lower contribution margins from the hydro segment as a result of significantly lower hydro availability and the change in margin in payments for the hedging transactions. The free cash flow after dividends showed a slightly positive development from 602.4 million to a level of minus 559.9 million. The lower operating cash flow and higher investments in property, plant and equipment, as well as lower dividend payments, were the reason for this development. Net debt increased from 1.976 billion at the end of 24 to 2.467 billion at the end of half year 25. Gearing correspondingly increased to a level of 23.2%. Now let me hand over to Peter again to present the outlook for 25.
Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, at the end of our results presentation, as always, our outlook. I would like to highlight the sensitivities as of the 30th of June. A deviation of plus minus 1% in the generation from hydropower has an impact of plus minus 7.5 million on our group results. A deviation of plus minus 1% in the generation from wind power and PV has an impact of 1 million in the group results, and the deviation of plus minus €1 in the wholesale price has an impact of plus minus 1.8 million in our group results for 25. Our updated guidance for 25 is as follows. We expect a reported and adjusted EBITDA of approximately between 2.75 and 3.1 billion, and the reported group result of approximately between 1.45 and 1.65 billion, under the assumption of average hydro, wind, and PV generation in the next 2 quarters, as well, of course, the actual chances and risk situation of the group. The earnings forecast is contingent on the group not being impacted by any further legal or regulatory changes. For the financial year 25, we are planning to pay out between 45% and 55% of our group results after adjustment for non-recurring effects. That would be between 1.43 and 1.63 billion. With that, I would like to move to our Q&A session. Please.
We will now begin the question and answer session. Anyone who wishes to ask a question may press star and 1 on their touch-tone telephone. You will hear a tone to confirm that you have entered the queue. If you wish to move yourself from the question queue, you may press star and 2. Anyone who has a question may press star and 1 at this time. The first question comes from the line of Wanda Serwinowska, UBS. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Wanda Serwinowska, UBS. 3 questions from me, if I may. The first question, Peter, is on 2025 guidance. I'm still trying to understand the moving parts because you've lost at least 2 terawatt-hours, so this is anything between, I would say, 150 to 200 million euro. You upgraded Greece EBITDA by 40 million. Yes, retail was a bit better, but what are we missing? Because you kept your guidance largely unchanged. And it's the first time I saw the flexibility product guidance for 2025. So how much it improved versus May, that would be very helpful. The second question is, do you mind sharing the latest hedging without a mark-to-market and also the hydro level in July? I'm just wondering if hydro rebounded or remained below the long-term average. And the third question is, yesterday there is something happening in Austria on the, let me just check it, Electricity Industry Act. Do you mind, which has been in discussions for 1 month or so, do you mind sharing your view? I think there was something about taxes, about social tariffs. Any high-level comment would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Wanda. Quite a lot. We will go through it one by one. First of all, let me give you sort of like the hedging levels for 25. We are currently 89% hedged at a level of 116. We are currently for the mark-to-market using a price of 103. As a result of that, we come up with the total volume price mark-to-market at 113 for 25. Now the same for 26. We are 50% hedged. What we have already contracted is at a price of 82 euros. The open volumes are priced at 89 euros. As a result, the total is at 85 euros per megawatt hour. And for 27, as I mentioned in the presentation, we have hedged only 3%, and those 3% we have hedged at 81. And the current forward price for 27 is at 83. As a result of that, the total would be at 83. So that is on the hedging levels. In terms of the full year guidance, there are a number of issues which we had to analyze and calculate for our full year guidance. Number one, as you know, we always use a hydro coefficient for the remainder of the year at 1. So we take the long-term average because we can't speculate if the weather continues like it is or if it gets better. So we always take the long-term average. If we take the first 6 months and we take the long-term average, the yearly hydro coefficient based on that calculation would be 0.88. So that is on the hydro generation. Then on the flexibility products, we were surprised that the flexibility products happily surprised, I should say, that the flexibility products came in better than we had expected. It wasn't the control energy. It wasn't the congestion management. This time it was mainly taking advantage of pumping and turbining at very good times. What does it mean? It means that we were able to pump at very low pricing levels, and we were able to sell at high prices. So the spread has gone up vis-a-vis our own expectations, vis-a-vis our planning, which is great news, because that is exactly the year when you have a low hydro coefficient that you need offsetting areas. In this case, it was the flexibility product. The third point, which I would like to mention is, and you know that from past years, it is very difficult to estimate for Austrian power grid the congestion management, the auction results. The auction results have a big impact. The auction results were much higher than Austrian Power Grid had expected. As a result of that, we were able, step by step, because at the beginning the guidance for APG was much lower. Now we were able to increase it again from 300 to 330. So those are the, I would say those are the key factors which played into our guidance discussion. But then, of course, there is one important point which I'm sure we will discuss further, which is the levy. People call it a windfall tax because that is sort of like a terminology we got used to during the high power prices, for the last few years. This time, I wouldn't even call it a windfall tax. It is more like what is considered by the Austrian government a contribution for the next 5 years to the Austrian deficit, which is quite high and which needs to be seriously addressed by the Austrian government. And this is sort of like the contribution from the utility industry. It is something where we would have preferred it to be for 1 year. Allows a very clear calculation, what is the downside, what is the impact. We're not very happy that, we have this for 5 years and we don't exactly know what exactly will be the calculation for every year. Now, what we have summarized on the page in terms of the levy is our current understanding. As I said in my presentation, there is a high probability that this will be the case. The big factor for us is how much Austrian domestic capex can we use to offset the levy. If that amount is relatively small, then we will probably be very close to the 100 million on the bottom line. If we can use more, and that doesn't look very likely at the moment, we would be probably at around 75. So this is something where we have some uncertainty, and this obviously goes into sort of like, our guidance consideration in as well. So that is a kind of a summary of our thinking in terms of the guidance. And what you mentioned yesterday in terms of the new regulation, this is, if I may say, a work in progress. The so-called LVG is a law that has been discussed for much too long. I think it's like 4 years by now. There are always other and new components which enter the discussions. Something that has been discussed more and more is some sort of a social tariff, which is a contribution from the utility industry to the poorest, which cannot afford their utility bill. Another area that is being discussed is basically payments which would be provided into the system by the generators. So it would be a payment of whatever euros per megawatt hour produced for the generators in the country. So this has not been decided yet. This is all under discussion. And as always, when we have either the facts or if we have a high probability, like on the levy, the stuff I mentioned before, we will obviously inform you. I mean, the one thing which you should know is that there is a big resistance by the provincial utilities because it would obviously have an impact on their profitability, and the provincial utilities majority owned by the states, by the provincial states. Therefore, this is not just a pure, how shall I say, this is not just a business discussion, this is a political discussion as well. between the Austrian government and the provincial states. So sorry, that has been rather long. I'm aware of that, but it's a lot of different areas.
Just hydro in July, because that was on my very, very long list. Apologies. Hydro in July?
Well, the hydro in July has been around 0.778, 79, probably higher. I will check the exact number for the month, and I will give it to you in a couple of minutes.
Thank you.
The next question comes from the line of Olly Jeffrey, Deutsche Bank. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks very much for taking my questions. So the first was just coming back to the change in the grid guidance for the year. If we take it from the start of the year, we're in excess of over 100 million in terms of increase in the guide for that. Can I confirm two things? One is that, is your view that the higher regulatory account that you would expect compared to what you thought would happen even in the last quarter, that this would impact your EBITDA from IFRS in that division more negatively in 26-27, so you expect the regulatory account to come out more strongly, so that would decrease your EBITDA contribution? And thinking you've increased the guidance just quite a lot throughout the year. Do you think the same trends that you've seen could carry on into the second half, and that there's probably more risk to the upside for that guidance to be lifted further, given the same trends repeat? And then just on the sales business, you had a very strong H1 there versus expectations. What do you see that sales division doing for the full year? And what do you think is sustainable into 26? I'm just trying to understand how much of the 25 performance is one-off, essentially. And so lastly, just on the coming back to the grid, the regulatory account, I presume that's not factored into the net debt. So then if you take that off from the net debt, your underlying net debt is probably closer to kind of 3.1 billion rather than 2.5 after stripping out the regulatory account. Is that the right way of looking at it? Thank you very much.
Okay. Let's start with the grid. Yeah, you're totally right. I mean, we have increased our guidance starting from the beginning of the year as a result of excellent auction results. That has been the key driver. There were other components as well, but that was the main reason. Do I think that we are going to see a continuation of sort of like, upping our guidance? I don't think so. In terms of your assumption on the regulatory account, i.e., what we have in excess revenues now going into the regulatory account, and therefore the regulatory account going up, yes, you're right. The regulatory account is at the highest level ever. If you had asked me 3 years ago if I could have seen a regulatory account around 650, I would have said no way. But that's where it is. We have been, you might remember, we have been for years in negotiations with E-Control, the regulator, because we said we would like to reduce the regulatory account step by step in a linear way every year. The regulator has not agreed to that. Don't please ask me why. Maybe to have some cushion for tariff increases in the future. But yes, on the IFRS, if we reduce the regulatory account, it has an impact on the EBITDA line. In terms of your theoretical debt level, if you were to include the regulatory account as a debt towards the system, I mean, if you made that theoretical calculation, because APG is a regulated business, therefore the regulatory account is separate, obviously. But the way you described it, you're right. It is a debt towards the system which we owe, and that is something that we need to quote unquote repay, through a reduction in the tariffs in the future. So if in the future we basically reduce every year the regulatory account, that would have an impact, as we mentioned before, and it would also reduce that sort of like artificial debt towards the system. Now, the next point was on the sales. Well, we had an increase of 30 million in the sales, and that increase came mainly from the flexibility products. Are we going to have a further increase from flexibility products for the rest of the year? I think our guidance, and we've thought about that, good and hard, is at 280, and there, I think that is a solid number, and that is a good assumption. The next question you posed is, well, is that a good level, for the next few years in terms of, thinking about flexibility products and what we think going forward? I mean, the 280, given the volatility of the system, given the challenges of stabilizing the system, is probably, not a bad number. Could it be 240, 230? Yes, of course. Could it be slightly higher? Yes, it could be slightly higher as well. So I'm not trying to evade. I'm just trying to sort of like express that, making an assessment on control energy, congestion management, pumping and turbining, intraday trading, etc. That is not an easy task because there are many external factors, which have a big impact. Again, talking about Austrian Power Grid, they know exactly the kind of auctions that are coming up. But the one thing they cannot assess is, how much is the demand and what are the, and what the auction results are. That is all a reflection of those external factors which are extremely hard to plan and to assess.
Thanks very much.
The next question comes from the line of Bartek Kubicki, Bernstein. Please go ahead.
Hello, and still good morning, and thanks for taking my questions. Two or three issues I would like to discuss. First, on the flexibility product, and more specifically on your pumped storage power plants. You mentioned that spreads have expanded during the first half, but I just wonder, is it normal that in the situation of subdued hydro conditions, you are able to get higher spreads on your pumped storage, or is it like an element, one-off event? And consequently also, on pumped storage and subdued hydro, does actually low hydro levels in Austria impact your pumped storage production or operating kind of efficiency, or is irrespective of hydro levels in Austria? That will be the first thing. Second thing, of course, you saw, first half saw that flexibility is an important part of your business model, and then you are pointing to some battery projects you have in your pipeline. Just high level picture, how do you think in the next couple of years the trade-off between batteries and gas-fired power plants will play out in Europe overall, or in Austria, or the regions where you are operating? As you can imagine, some of the players are very bullish gas-fired power plants, but there are also views that batteries will cannibalize gas-fired power plants. So just to know your view on this one. And maybe the last one, sorry, on APG and the potential capex ramp up, because of course the potential capex ramp up needs to happen. The typical question we ask networks is, how are you doing with procurement and the supply chain? You can actually kind of guide us here how much of the future capex is already pre-procured, pre-agreed in terms of the prices, and how are you doing with permitting as well on the potential ramp up? Thank you.
Okay. Again, Good question. I will start with the last one, then I will talk about the flexibility product. Andreas, could you talk about pump storage? Yeah, great. Now, you're absolutely right. Procurement is a big issue, not only in Central Europe, but actually globally. The same is true for the US, the same is true for Asia. Obviously, there is huge capex in terms of the entire energy system. You have a limited amount of high-quality producers, and they produce as much as they can, but there is a limit, which basically means that there is a procurement challenge in the system for transformers, for cables, for everything you need, for the grid, for transformer stations, etc. And procurement strategy for all the infrastructure operators is critical. So what they try to do is to have agreements with the key producers that cover basically a long period of time to give the producers some stability. As a result of that, they can make sure that to get the product in line with their capex planning, that are not going to be major delays. And that is a very, very important aspect. Austrian Power Grid basically has started to adjust their procurement strategy many years ago, anticipating that this could be an issue. On the flexibility products, if I understood you correctly, and let me paraphrase, you were basically thinking about the duality between classic flexibility products and the build-out of batteries in order to alleviate some of the issues with system instability. Is that correct?
No, the question would be whether you think in the midterm the build-out of batteries can cannibalize on gas-fired power plants. So consequently, gas-fired power plants will become less and less relevant to the system in the midterm. And then as a result, of course, your strategy of focusing on batteries rather than on gas-fired power plants in your kind of flex. How do you think about this?
Yeah. Well, it sounds like an easy question. It's very complex. Because first of all, it depends which type of gas-fired power plants you would install. I mean, if you go for so-called peakers, that are power plants that are much less expensive, and you basically lose them for less hours than you would use a CCGT. A CCGT is very expensive, has longer duration, and basically needs to run on a base load basis and not to provide flexibility products. So that is the first key question. When you can actually use written off existing gas-fired power plants, then of course they can act as very efficient as a very efficient flexibility product provider. They're probably pretty certain then they would be more effective than batteries. Why more effective? Because when you look at the capacity of batteries and you compare it with the capacity of gas-fired power plants, there is a dramatic difference. So in order to have a real impact on the stability of the system, you need a huge amount of batteries. Yeah. So when you just look at capacity numbers and you compare a gas-fired power plant with batteries, you will see that there is a huge delta. As a result of that, only a dramatic build-out of batteries coming down in cost, and batteries being based in those areas where you have critical instability, like critical nodes, as they call it in the grid system, then you could increase the effectiveness of batteries. But I think it will take quite some time before batteries can replace gas-fired power plants to provide the necessary stability.
Okay, Pat. Then let me continue with the pump storage topic. I would say that the profitability of pump storage is not so much dependent on the availability of hydro. I mean, at the beginning of the year, we had hydro in the system, so in the storage. When you have hydro in the storage system, which is a closed system, in a pump, when you pump, then I think you are relatively independent from the level of hydro. Yeah? The reason why it was supportive is basically more because we see an increase in trends of, let's say, higher prices at off-peak times, so more in the morning, or let's say more towards evening, night, over day. So we had here higher prices and lower prices during the day when PVs are in operation or when wind is in operation. Yeah? So and that is the reason why we had this support and basically a doubling of the pumping spread roughly compared to what we had originally in the plan. Is this a trend? I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I would say yes. On a short-term basis, the more volatile electricity you have in the system, of course, the more beneficial, the bigger the spreads, the price spreads between peak and off-peak times, and the more support you have for the storage power plants. But we also have a second effect, and this is a little bit coming back to the question of the compensating effect and the impact on hydro levels on other areas of VERBUND. We had a supportive effect from the hydropower in our run-of-river business, which was supportive for the hydropower segment, because clearly when you have an extremely low hydro level in Austria, you usually have a much bigger price spread between Germany and Austria. And then I think the proxy hedge, which we do for our run-of-river power plant, is clearly benefiting. Yeah? So you know that we are selling basically our electricity on the basis of the German futures, and when we close the contracts, then we buy electricity on the basis of the German spot price and sell electricity on the basis of the Austrian spot price. And so let's say when you have a higher spread, then it is clearly, which we had in first half year, I think the average spread was more towards 8-9 euros per megawatt hour. This is clearly supportive. And then the second point, when we have low hydro in Austria, then usually you have the necessity to import electricity. You have also the necessity to transport more electricity across the high voltage grid system. And Peter mentioned before, let's say the auction being one of the biggest, let's say, positives in the first half year. Yes, and the second was the higher transport volumes, which led to higher tariffs. So when there is low hydro, we have to transport more electricity on the high voltage grid, and this is also supporting the results development in the grid business.
Well, thank you very much.
The next question comes from the line of Alberto Di Antonio, BNP Exane. Please go ahead.
Hi, good morning, and thank you so much for taking my questions. My first question will be a follow-up on the guidance. What I want to clarify is on the hydro guidance. You mentioned that for the remaining part of the year, you are taking the one hydro coefficient for your numbers. Is that correct? And if there is a deviation, could this have a positive or a negative impact, therefore? The second one will be on the batteries. I would like to understand the economics that these battery projects that you are installing have. What's the average cost of installations, the number of cycles, where are they located, or if you have received any subsidies related to them. And finally, the last one on CapEx. You are guiding for 1.95 billion CapEx for the full year. During the first half of the year, you have invested around 500 million. How do you expect the second half of the year to be? Could you explain us the bridge? Is there any big payments related to the commissioning of the hydro pumping plants or any other asset expected in the second half of the year that has not happened during the first half of the year? Thank you so much.
Okay, sure. Now, the first one on the guidance and the hydro coefficients. If we take the long-term average for the rest of the year, i.e. 1, the overall hydro coefficient at the end of the year under that assumption would be 0.88. If, of course, the dryness would continue, then it could be below that. If there is a change in the trend and we have more precipitation in the second half of the year, then of course this can change as well. So this is a pure mathematical calculation, taking into account what we have in terms of hydro coefficient, the volume which we have, and taking the long-term average for the rest of the year. It is no indication whatsoever on what we think about weather developments. In terms of the batteries, what we do internally is we do discounted cash flow models, where we basically make an assessment on future cash flows, which we think we can get from those batteries. We take into consideration the different products which we have available, which is of course control energy, intraday arbitrage, etc. So we make those assumptions, and our WACC plus our hurdle rate is basically what we're looking for. So if we have our hurdle rate, that is a green light for the investment. We don't give specifics in terms of cycle times, in terms of the specific capex per megawatt. This is information which we don't give out. In terms of the capex, yes, you're absolutely right. The capex plan was much higher than what we had achieved in the first 6 months. There's a reason for that. Similar to the previous years, there is a trend that we have more capex in the first half of the year. So there is the first 6 months is basically a lot of the preparation, if I may say, and then the actual capex when it hits the accounting is usually the majority in the second half of the year. However, we have some delays as well. We have a delay of something between 200 and 220 million euros in the new renewables on solar installations, where we had originally planned to do those in 25, and they will now be postponed into 26. So those are the key factors.
Thank you very much.
The next question comes from the line of Luis Pujar from Oddo. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, good morning everyone. Thank you for taking my question. Maybe some follow-up going back on certain topics, notably regarding the regulatory account, first of all. Could you please remind us what would be currently the expected timing for you to go back to something around zero? And is it something that is possible going forward on the regulatory account, considering that you will most likely still generate above normal earnings in the next few years? So how do you see this evolving in the next few years, and is there a kind of timing at which we could expect it to converge back towards zero? Second topic, maybe regarding the hydro once again. We witnessed a very dry beginning of the year. You expect, of course, to go back to normalization in our guidance, as always. In the past, did you already see such a move, meaning that after such a dry period, is it something that is possible on a statistical point of view to come back to something which is normalized for the next 5 months? Or is it something that looks improbable according to you and based on the data that you have on the historic level of hydro in Austria? Maybe the last one, if I may, regarding the tax and regarding the discussion. I understand that you are able eventually, in the best case scenario, to offset 25 million euros of tax for this year, 2025, in the discussion that you gave us during the presentation. I struggle to understand if there is a possibility, considering the current tax environment and the probably a decision that will be taken, that this level could be a bit enlarged going forward, meaning that you would be able to maybe offset a larger share of tax in the next few years from 26 to 2030, notably because of the reallocation of some capex eventually in Austria that would be eligible for tax deduction going forward. So is it something that is a possibility or not, according to you? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will start with the easy one. There was the second one. Historically, and this is great about the weather, it is totally unpredictable, and I think not even general AI will be able to help us a lot with weather predictions. No, historically we have really seen going from very dry to sort of like wet, even sort of like the last 6 weeks of the year making a real difference because it had been so wet. And then of course the other way around. It is I totally understand where you're coming from, but it is very, very difficult to predict what if there is a trend, and if the trend could continue, and if there is any historical historical fact that would allow us to make a judgment. There is not. On the regulatory account, that was your first question. We would not go down to zero because the regulator has always said in the past that he would like to have some sort of like a base regulatory account, call it 250. The regulator would not allow to go below that. So what we're talking about is, we're currently at 650, going down to 250, 400 over a number of years. That is something we would like to see. It would make our planning easier. It would be easier in my communication with you guys, to give you some guidance on that. However, as the past few years have shown, it is very difficult to predict. But we would like to sort of like reduce step by step, if in any way possible, down to approximately 250. And on the tax one, I understand where you're coming from. However, I have to tell you that using domestic capex to offset the future levy and bringing it down to a low level will be very unlikely, because the Ministry of Finance looks exactly at how much they can get, and if they don't get enough, they make adjustments. They have made an announcement publicly where they said we want to get at least 200 million every year for the next 5 years. So if, for example, they realize that in 27 they would not get 200 but only 50, they would probably make some sort of an adjustment. and the reason being there has been no growth, i.e. negative growth, GMP over the last 3 years in Austria. That has been, I think it has been the last one in Europe within the EU in terms of GMP growth. At the same time, debt and budget deficit are increasing, so the Ministry of Finance is basically looking into very specific measures to counter the deficit, and this has been one, and he needs the money as a result, and he has already said he will make adjustments. So to summarize, the probability of being able to use CapEx in 26, 27 to bring down the number is relatively small.
Thank you. This is clear. Thank you very much.
The next question comes from the line of Piotr Dzieciolowski from Citi. Please go ahead.
Hi, hello. It's Piotr Dzieciolowski from Citi. I have a couple of questions. So the first one I wanted to ask you about, in the changing power price profile, is there a chance or is there a case where you could maybe try to think about the investment of changing your dispatch of your hydropower from run of the river, so kind of like a building reservoirs on the side? I'm not sure if that's technically possible, but if I look at the forward zone, they typically guide us to a way higher optimization premium. I understand there's a couple of components in there, but how do you think about opportunity to change the way, given that the discrepancies between the peak and off-peak prices is much bigger? And is there any rule of thumb by which you would say how much you utilize this flexibility of dispatching your plants and what this translates into a cheap premium over the base price or whatever the benchmark you use? So that would be the question number one. And second, regarding the taxation in Austria, is there a risk? I'm sorry to being so direct, but can you just pinpoint VERBUND and say, craft the tax in a shape that it would direct only large-scale hydro, or really distinguish you from a small municipality utilities that own some hydro assets and basically take more of the money from you? And then on this taxation, if the aim is to get a 200 million and 100 from you, why are you trying to offset it with the capex? Because in reality, what you just said before is that even if you pay less because you spend more capex and you lower the burden, then all of a sudden the ministry can come back and then really take the 100. So this would be the kind of a question on the opportunity to invest or change the dispatch, and the second on the taxation, whether you can really pinpoint the VERBUND.
Wow. Okay. Now those are questions which don't allow an easy or simple answer. Now I will start with the power price profile, as you have called it, and I hope that I understood correctly what you asked. If I go in the wrong direction, please stop me and redirect. First of all, the system of how we look at run-of-river versus reservoirs versus pump storage, flexibility products, that system has been optimized over decades, literally over decades, and we're not going to change it because we make slight adjustments every year, and we think that the system, the way it is structured today, works very well. So we don't really have any rules of thumb. The only rule of thumb which we have is that every hour of the day we try to optimize. And we don't really use benchmarks because as I've mentioned before, we have a lot of volatility in the energy system, which is exactly why we have not been able to plan for the higher flexibility products, because all the data points which we have had did not guide us towards that. Otherwise, we would have planned for it. But at the same time, every day when we saw, relatively low numbers, low prices for pumping, we have immediately taken advantage of that, and equally on the turbining. And I think that Andreas before, has explained very well sort of like the logic, behind the way how we optimize pumping, storage, and turbining. The premium is an artificial premium. I mean, I know that the market talks about premium, but what it really is like, run-of-river is baseload. You sell the baseload according to our hedging principles. And then we have the flexibility product, and we have the optimization, basically from our pumping, from our reservoirs. That is, you could argue that is a premium per megawatt hour, but at the end of the day, it is a very specific product, which we take advantage of, given the instability of the energy system, which will certainly continue for quite some time. Now, on the taxation. First of all, the 200 million is not a VERBUND number. The 200 million is all the Austrian utilities. The fact is that by far we are the largest. As a result of that, we are hit more than others. There is also for wind and solar, there's an exemption, i.e. the ones that have a feed-in tariff are not burdened with the levy. The rationale being you get a feed-in tariff from the Republic of Austria as a result of making those investments. So we would in fact sort of like reduce the feed-in tariff through the back door. That is something that has been discussed, and they decided against that. The capex. The capex which we use domestically will not be influenced by the levy, i.e. we're not going to invest more here in Austria as a result of being able to deduct. We invest if we think that we achieve a good return on that investment, and if then, and that is secondary, and if then we can use that capex to offset, obviously we are going to use it. If we are able to offset more, and as a result of that, our contribution to the 200 million is lower because of that, well, the finance minister cannot only look at us, at VERBUND, but he basically has to look at the entire utility sector. Yeah. So we will continue to use any capex which we have domestically. We will continue to use it as an offset in terms of the taxation.
Okay. Can I just have a follow-up, maybe on slightly different subject? Did you have any power buybacks in the second quarter? And what's how should I think about the kind of a hydro coefficient below which you have a need to do a power buybacks?
Well, when you look at our hedging, you will see that we have 60% kind of 1.5 years forward. Then we have 20% in terms of the quarterly product, and we have 20% in terms of the sort of like the monthly and the weekly product, which basically leaves another 20% which is open. Those 20% gives us a cushion, to a rough cushion. Yeah. Then of course we make adjustments. When we see that it is particularly dry, then we reduce the weekly product in order to reduce the amount of power which we have to buy in the market in order to fulfill our obligations. But there you see that the cushion which we have is 20%. That's quite a lot.
So does this mean you had some power buybacks in the second quarter that impacted your numbers?
Yes, we have. Whenever we have such low figures in terms of the hydro coefficient, despite the fact that we obviously optimize in connection with what I've mentioned before, we usually have buybacks, and the buybacks for the first half year were approximately 130 million.
negative impact, right?
Negative impact.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very helpful.
You're welcome.
The next question comes from the line of Richard Alderman, BTIG. Please go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can. Thank you.
Hi. Yes, just a couple of quick questions, if I may, to follow up on the previous comments. I'm interested in your comment earlier on where you said that the regulator had refused your plan to reduce the regulatory account. And I was just wondering why that is, because clearly if you reduce use of system charges into the whole system, it ultimately reduces prices for customers. So what's the rationale for letting the regulatory account just keep building up over the last few years? And then the second question would be, you mentioned that you pushed into 2026 200 to 300 million of solar-based capex. Do I assume that's all in Spain? And if so, is that partly because at the moment the returns are looking suboptimal, so you're just postponing it whilst you consider whether you can find PPAs to actually back up the capex in the first place?
Okay. I will start with the second one. Yes, we have pushed into 26. It is basically a result of the permitting processes. It is not a very sort of like a specific decision that we say we think that, we can optimize power prices in 26 versus now. The first one, you're absolutely right, and that is exactly what we say. We basically say, look, reducing the regulatory account is a win-win situation. No, actually, it's a win-win-win situation. It is a win for us because it gives us more stability, more earning stability. It is a win for the customers, for the system, because of a tariff reduction. And it is a win for the regulator because the regulator has, I would say, more stability in terms of, tariff strategy and tariff policy. The reason why he's not doing it, I cannot give you a specific answer because I don't have one. I could only speculate, and actually I shouldn't speculate, I think, but I'll do it anyway. The regulatory account gives the regulator flexibility in terms of his future tariff policy. So, for example, if for whatever reasons tariffs continue to go up, and you know that this is a big discussion across Europe, everybody complains about the fact that on the one hand you need the infrastructure, on the other hand, the huge investments into infrastructure, somebody has to pay for it, and there's a big discussion in Germany. So is it the system, i.e. the clients? Then people say, well, this is too much for the clients. Well, but if it's not the clients, it's the taxpayer. So somebody has to pay for it. There is no clear solution to the issue, to the problem. A solution would be to reduce capex, but if you reduce capex, how can you synchronize all that with the build out of renewables and with system stability? So it's not an easy one to solve. But coming back to the regulator might think that if tariffs go up even further, and if there's pressure on the regulator to reduce the tariffs or to reduce the increase of the tariffs, he has the possibility of working with the regulatory account. So that could be a possible explanation. However, we will continue to discuss that it might be better to go step by step in a linear way.
So just on that point, given that the new government is obviously interfering more in the energy system and the cost of the system and thinking about a social tariff, could there be some point in the near future where they put pressure on the regulator because it's obvious that this is another way of reducing costs in the system when people are struggling in terms of cost of living and moving GDP upwards?
Yeah, it is possible. It is the regulator is totally independent, and in the past the politicians have been very careful to try and influence the regulator. They have been respectful of the regulator's independence. If there is a lot of pressure and the pressure is not just on a sort of like an expert discussion level, the pressure is in the media, in the mass media. As a result of that, it could well be that there might be some pressure on the regulator, to use all means he has to reduce some of the tariff increases.
Thank you. That's helpful. And one last quick follow-up question to the question before me. On the cost, the 130 million cost of buying in because of the hydro shortfall in the first half, do you see any risk of that at least carrying through in Q3, given the coefficient is still struggling to get above 0.8?
I don't see it. It could be that there will be buybacks in the second half, but I don't see a big risk there.
Okay. Thanks very much.
We have a follow-up question from Olly Jeffrey, Deutsche Bank. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Two follow-ups. The first one is on your financial costs for the first half. So that financial result was 50 million positive. How has that evolved versus your expectations at the beginning of the year for what would happen for the first half? My sense is that might be better than what you initially anticipated. If that is the case, what has driven that? That would be helpful to know. And the second one is just coming back to the debate around grid costs and how they'll be allocated. What's the timeline, or is there a timeline on when we should get news on that and therefore get clarity on what the implications might be for yourselves? Is that a 25 event or unknown? Thank you.
Sure. First of all, unless there is something really urgent, this will be the last two questions from this conference call. Obviously, we're always at your disposal. You can call us anytime, our investor relations team, and we will answer anything you have. However, there is a limitation in terms of our follow-on schedule, which we have. Now, on those two questions, I will start with the second one, and Andreas, maybe you could do the first one. On the second one, it is you're absolutely right. It is a big discussion, and it is an important discussion, and it's not just an Austrian or German discussion. It is, quite frankly, it is a European discussion. There are many. There is a game. There are rules to the game. There are many players. Every player or every stakeholder has a slightly different approach and a slightly different opinion. Don't forget that at the end of the day, we have national energy systems. They are all different and they all require different measures. The EU is trying hard, not always very effectively, to look at Europe as a whole and to find measures within Europe to solve the conundrum, and it really is a conundrum. And I will try to sort of like to really bring it to the to the concentrated focal point of where the problem lies. In Europe, we have a base load problem. As a result of the build-up of the renewables, that we need to that system instability we need to resolve. We can either resolve it by having a lot of base load, which is a backup, and that is expensive. The more natural way of resolving it, because it's a long-term solution, would be the build-out of infrastructure. The build-out of infrastructure, as I've really said over the last 10 years on these calls, should have been synchronized with the build-out of renewables. It beats me why it has not been synchronized, because it is technically totally logical and rational, but it hasn't been done. As a result of that, there is now a lot of additional infrastructure capex which needs to be made across Europe, and the final answer to who is going to pay for it has not been made. And the reason is that how much more can the taxpayer be burdened in Europe? Number one. Number two, how much more is the industry or the retail clients willing to pay in terms of tariffs? And what can you do overall? Mr. Merz, as you might have seen, he has basically said already quite some time ago, and he has repeated it. He's basically said we need private capital to fund the massive build-up of infrastructure. The only way to get private capital is to have a fair market return. I don't even want to say attractive return. I would say you want to have a fair market return in order to attract the capital. And this is why you have seen big discussions in Spain. You have seen big discussions in the UK. We're discussing it here with the regulator in Austria. You are seeing revisions in Germany in terms of the new regulatory period. So my assumption would be that you will see an increase in allowed returns. As a result of that, hopefully more private capital going into the system, and the entire build-out being properly synchronized as to hopefully, reduce the increase in the tariffs. And I'll make a last comment, otherwise we go into too much technical detail. But the tremendously fast development in artificial intelligence, which is surprising us every month with the new things coming out, obviously will allow for the systems to be way smarter than what the systems are today. If we use that possibility over the next few years, we should be able to have a much, much better synchronization between the supply side and the demand side. And with those kind of intelligent adjustments, we should be able to reduce the tariffs. That brings me to our last answer today, at least on this conference call. Andreas.
Yeah, all right. So the financial result was 50 million. As you said, in half year, it's better than what we would have expected and what we have planned. And there are, I think, two variables which are difficult to be planned. First one is the contribution from Kelag, which was better than originally budgeted. So this is one effect, and the second one is a valuation effect coming from the measurement of an obligation to return an interest in Donaukraftwerke Jochenstein, which is a hydropower plant. And this is as I said, it's a valuation effect which is highly volatile, and the measurement is dependent on the development of the wholesale electricity price. So usually when wholesale electricity price goes up, the valuation goes down, so there's a negative valuation effect and vice versa. And this quarter or this half year, as prices are lower or have declined, we have here a positive valuation effect, and I think that's quite significant, with about 35 million euros. And this is of course always dependent on the development of the wholesale price, and it's difficult for us to forecast as well. Yeah.
Great. Oli, thank you. Well, I would like to thank all of you for your interest in the middle of the summer. This is great. This has been a very important and a very interesting discussion. Many questions covering a lot of different areas. Thank you. And should there be any follow-up questions, please don't hesitate to contact us today or tomorrow, whenever. And I look forward to speaking to all of you for our third quarter conference call. Many thanks, and have a great summer vacation. All the best. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, the conference is now over. Thank you for choosing Chorus Call, and thank you for participating in the conference. You may now disconnect your lines. Goodbye.